Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Discussing a Murderer. This is episode 7. And with me today, again, let's go from the top to the bottom this time. Hey, Big Jeff, how you doing?
Hey Jeff, I'm doing great, and I know this is going to be a really rough one. So fasten your seatbelts because I don't think this is going to be pretty.
Hey, Cal, how you doing today?
Good morning, everyone. I'm very well.
And Dr. Silkman?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, panel. And thank you for inviting us all back. We must be doing something right.
A major break in this case tonight as authorities plan to charge that 16-year-old boy. Tonight, we did speak with the mother of this 16-year-old. This is what she had to say.
Stephen, I know you're going to be watching this, but I hate you for what you did to my kid. All right? So you can rot in hell.
Now, another press conference will be held
And
at
Jeff,
2 p.m. tomorrow. At that time, this teen will be charged.
You know, how bad is it when your own sister appears on national television and actually starts blaming her brother for what he did to her son, giving the implications that Stephen really did the murder, right? The rape and the murder. So it really, as Big Jeff alluded to, that is a huge turning point when a member of your own family believes in your guilt. That's really, really bad.
Yeah, and if you listen to the jail calls prior to March, he talks to Barb several times. I mean, it's 20, 30 times. Sometimes for long periods of time, sometimes just to say hi when she's over at Ma's. It's rather cordial. And for her to turn around and say that all of a sudden I don't believe you must have been tremendously hurtful to him.
Yep, absolutely. And we mustn't also forget the calls that Brendan made to Barb as well, and the way a lot of the guilters have turned it around as Brendan admitting his guilt without really understanding the context of what Brendan was saying to Barb. And if you listen to some of the later jail phone calls, you can see that Barb actually had become convinced of the innocence of both Brendan and also her brother Stephen. It's amazing that turnaround that took place. But however, you have to admit, from a perspective of hearing your own sister on national television claiming that your own brother is guilty, that doesn't look good. It really doesn't look good.
Details, including details of Teresa's death, are expected to be released at that time. Tom?
Oh, but what a story.
I know that there are some news outlets that are carrying this live, and perhaps there may be some children that are watching this. I'm going to ask that if you're under the age of 15, that you discontinue watching this press conference. We have now determined what occurred sometime between 3:45 p.m. And 10 or 11 p.m. on the 31st of October. 16-year-old Brendan Dassey, who lives next door to Stephen Avery in a trailer, returned home on the bus from school about 3:45 p.m. He retrieved the mail and noticed one of the letters was for his uncle, Stephen Avery. As Brendan approaches the trailer, as he actually gets several hundred feet away from the trailer, a long, long way from the trailer, Brendan already starts to hear the screams. As Brendan approaches the trailer, he hears louder screams for help, recognizes it to be of a female individual.
Jeff, his brother Blaine got off the bus with him, went to the house. Blaine hears no such thing. What the fuck? How is that even believable?
I think it goes along with more of what they continue to deliver a falsified story.
And that house is little. We can recount all the people who were there, right? You know who else was home? Brian Dassey was home at the time. The oldest brother.
Also, Bobby Dassey was there too.
Correct. Yes. Up to a point when he left to go hunting with his friend Mike Osmond.
Correct.
But somehow, Brendan is the only one who hears this when you can hear it from hundreds of feet away. Right. Not believable.
And of course, the insanity, what is just totally unbelievable here was that Brendan and Blaine walked straight past the letterboxes, right? So when they got off the bus, they actually walked straight past the letterboxes, because the letterboxes are at the end of Avery Road, where the bus driver lets off the boys. So are you trying to tell me that Brendan went all the way home, got his bike, and then went all the way back to pick up the mail? And you know what is truly remarkable is that the mail is brought to Stephen by, guess who? You know who normally brings the mail?
Yeah, Ma. Ma brings it on the mail cart.
Yeah, Dolores. Dolores brings the mail. And it's remarkable that Brendan Dassey later admitted, well, I couldn't have actually ridden my bike to get the mail because I don't have a bike. So it really is shocking. And I know that Big Jeff was cowering his head in shame and anger. You know, a press conference like this really sets the stage. And as Big Jeff alluded to, Kelly alluded to, it is the turning point of the case. You have now polluted the jury pool. Everyone is shocked and disgusted that this, people were thinking, nah, there's no way that this particular crime took place. No way that Brendan and Stephen did this. And then the lead prosecuting DA does a press conference with the sheriff, and he basically tells a story. Hint, hint, tells a story.
That's right. And do you guys remember the first thing that we talked about in this podcast in episode 1 was those mailboxes that you mentioned there, Dr. Soapman. So that's, we really are building to a climax here, that finally now after, 7 weeks, we've now hit that point where the first stage of the first clip of this podcast comes back into focus.
Big Jeff really hit the nail on the head. Brendan Dassey wasn't the only boy that got off the bus. His brother Blaine did. So in essence, Blaine was the alibi of Brendan. And they had questioned Blaine. And Blaine said, look, me and my brother, we got off the bus at 3:45, around 3:45 p.m. We walked down the gravel road to our parents' home and we went inside. We did not see Stephen. We did not see Teresa. We did not see her vehicle. We went home, right? So hence, all the different versions that Brendan was saying to Detective O'Neill, he changed his mind. He changed his recollections because Detective O'Neill had challenged him about what the bus driver had seen, Lisa Buchner. The problem, of course, we find out later, was that Lisa Buchner could not remember the day, the time, or the week in which she saw a female photographer. This had disastrous consequences for Brendan because he changed his recollections. And as Big Jeff and Kelly have alluded to, Brendan is the type of boy that's very impressionable and you can change his mind very easily. Now, Brendan simply changed his recollections because he thought, okay, well, they're telling me I'm lying. What's the big deal if I see a photographer? Of course, the big deal is that he got dragged into the narrative. Right, Big Jeff?
That's right. That's right. I mean, I think Brendan is, my description of Brendan is non-confrontational, and he'll say whatever he needs to get people out of his face. That's the way that I, so it's kind of active, get out of my face. So you want me, I saw a photographer? That's great. I saw her.
Yep,
Yeah,
100% correct.
I recall that. I had to step out of the, I had to, as a matter of fact, I had to step out of the driveway so
That's
she could drive the
correct.
wrap up.
That's correct. And Detective O'Neill said, no, that's wrong, Brendan. You never saw Teresa Horbach leave, right? Because obviously the victim, you can't have the victim driving away from the salvage yard, right? So even though poor Brendan changed his story many times, the detective did not believe him, which ultimately proved fatal for Brendan.
And he knocks on Stephen Avery's trailer door. Brendan says that he knocks at least 3 times and has to wait until a person he knows as his uncle, who is partially dressed, who is full of sweat, opens the door and greets his 16-year-old nephew. Brendan accompanies his sweaty 43-year-old uncle down the hallway to Stephen Avery's bedroom, and there they find Teresa Halbach completely naked and shackled to the bed.
Jeff?
Teresa Halbach is begging.
You saw it right there with that footage, right? And you saw that Stephen Avery's bed was indeed around the corner, right? And it's remarkable because when Fassbender and Wiegert had questioned Brendan, right, they said, well, when you went in the trailer, what did you see? And Brendan said, well, when I looked down the corridor, I saw Teresa Horbach pinned to the bed, right? And of course, we now know, of course, that the bed was not underneath the window, but it was around the corner, 90 degrees underneath the gun rack. So hence, Brendan guessed. And he could not have seen Teresa Horbach, and he could not have heard Teresa Horbach yelling and screaming from hundreds of yards away. Brendan's story was patently false.
Doesn't he also say that he went in there and sat on the couch and Stephen got him a soda?
That's correct.
He was sitting there for a while. Despite the screaming in the other room, he's sitting there calmly drinking his damn soda.
That's correct.
How believable. Yeah.
So, think about it. You got Fassbender and Wiegert, who are meant to be 2 seasoned investigators, and they're listening to Brendan. Oh, yeah, my sweaty uncle let me in. Obviously, Teresa Horbach is yelling and screaming for her life. Oh, what did you do, Brendan? Oh, my uncle sat me down in the TV room and we drank a soda.
Soda.
Completely crazy.
Brendan for her life. The evidence that we've uncovered establishes that Stephen Avery at this point invites his 16-year-old nephew to sexually assault this woman, and he's had bound to
Stop.
that. During the rape, Teresa is begging.
What I'm about to say is a little bit sensitive, so apologies in advance, but I'm just going to hit this because let's tackle this problem. Brennan's 16 years old. Now, I can't say if I think he had been sexually active before. I'm going to say most likely not. I would think Brendan was a virgin. I'm sorry, but I cannot picture a 16-year-old virgin who's never experienced this kind of, anything to this nature being very traumatic, really, for your very first time, if this was indeed true, being able to perform in any sexual experience with a woman tied down as a virgin for your very first time. That, for me, was one of the turning factors. As a mother of teenagers, I just was like, when I first saw this, I was like, that's impossible. It took me back to this is going to sound awkward, back to my first time and how you feel as when it happens. And sometimes, people feel guilty. Some people feel happy because it's you're young and you're in love. How the hell can anyone believe this 16-year-old, I'm going to say virgin, would be able to perform any kind of sexual, rape and hold it together? I just that really trips me out that people actually bought into this bullshit. I also have to say that I part of my Making a Murder journey, it brings me shame, but in Australia, I remember the first contact I ever had to this was the Dr. Phil episode. And I remember it was on in the background, and this was the first time I even heard of Stephen Avery. And it was Dr. Phil was interviewing, I think it was Fassbender, and they were talking about Brendan, you know, what we basically saw before we started this podcast, which was him saying, oh, you know, maybe he, you know, didn't completely tell the truth. I just don't know. But I believe it wasn't coerced. We didn't trick him into a false confession. When I first watched that, it brings me shame to say that in passing, when it was on in the background, I kind of turned around and was like, oh my God, they're so guilty. This kid, you know, he's confessed. This guy's a monster. And then it was years, not long after that, I shouldn't say years, not long after that, it would have been months, my friend came to me and said, hey, listen, you're into true crime. You've got to watch this Making a Murderer. It'll blow your mind. And then it took me even longer to then actually commit to it. And when I first watched it, the first few episodes, I thought it was boring. I didn't quite get or grasp the 1985 case. I just kind of watched it and was like, where's this going? And at this point, and like we've all just spoken about, it's this point we're coming up to that changes everything. But I just want to say that it's going to get harder, and I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, what am I gonna go and say next, because I don't even have the confidence to really weigh into the Brendan side right now, because it's just heartbreaking and it's just bullshit. Sorry guys, just wanted to hit it now in case I don't
I
talk
think
after.
that is a brilliant point, and I've actually never heard you make it before. And you know, it just made me think when you were saying it that, you know, people have all sorts of you know, fetish kind of fantasies. You know, 50 Shades of Grey kind of fantasies, but to find that situation tittillating enough that you could perform, you really have to be like a super sexual deviant to be able to do that. And and Brendan much preferred to play video games, and when he was on the computer, he IM'd his friends, right? He wasn't the one searching, you know, that deviant pornography. It just to me, I find that point absolutely brilliant. That there's just no way that could be titillating at all to a person in his situation with his sort of you know, mental situation.
Yeah, I just want to echo the comments made by Kelly and also Big Jeff. Unfortunately, what you see in this case is a lack of common sense and logic. Now, you got to ask yourself the question, right? You look at Brendan Dassey's personality, his mental abilities. He has always been described as a quiet, shy, introverted kid. And even his father had said, look, Brendan, all he likes to do is to stay in his room and play video games and keep to himself. Think about it. Would a 16-year-old shy, introverted boy who's very likely a virgin get sexually turned on by a yelling, screaming, naked woman he has never seen before, tied up and chained to a bed? Lord can only imagine what that scene would have been like, right? Yelling, screaming, begging for her life, begging for this to stop, for an event like this to sexually turn on Brendan Dassey, and mind you, in the presence of his uncle, right? I mean, you know, most people are shy if they know that there's somebody in another room and you get sexually turned on with your partner. Imagine having sexual intercourse with a female you've never met before, tied up to a bed, shackled to a bed, yelling, screaming, and in the presence of your adult uncle. Unfortunately, in this case, guys, common sense and logic has completely flown out of the window. I would say normally this will be the biggest sexual turn-off for a 16-year-old boy that you could ever think of. How can anyone be sexually aroused in such a shocking situation if that actually happened? You know what? My final point is this. Sorry, Big Jeff. This is the type of activity that would sexually turn on Gregory Allen, a known sexual deviant. Are you now trying to compare a 16-year-old Brendan Dassey to the hypersexual deviant Gregory Allen? That's exactly what they want you to believe here, guys. Truly shocking.
Yeah, and just to tie the knot together of what we just said, is Brendan is someone who is easily pushed around, and changes his mind, changes his action based on what people tell him to do. And if in such a situation, someone is begging him to stop, to get off, I think he would listen to that. I think that would have an effect on him. So it is none of it adds up. So.
I agree with what you guys said. There's just a couple comments that I'd throw in there that, like, from my own point of view, if I'm him and I'm grabbing the mail and I'm walking to the trailer and the story plays out as Kratz says it, in a realistic scenario, Brendan Dassey's running back to get Blaine and Bobby to say, "Oh my God, you don't know, can't believe what I heard over at Steven's trailer. You got to come check this out with me." That's what it really would have happened had he heard screams from the trailer. And I believe that because that's the most logical, rational point of view as a 16-year-old kid of who Brendan was at the time. Also, I think that it's the most important point in this scenario that drives home how absolutely absurd this scenario is we don't have a lick of physical evidence in that bedroom.
Oh, that's 100% correct. There's actually, from a forensic standpoint, I don't care what any guilter says. From a forensic standpoint, there's absolutely no evidence that Teresa Horbach was ever inside the trailer, let alone the bedroom, right? There is absolutely no physical, chemical, biological, or no matter how you want to say it, any trace evidence of anybody being shackled to that bed, right? Now they checked the shackles, they checked the bed head, they took apart Stephen Avery's bedroom, they took out his carpet looking for signs of blood, hair, tissue, you name it. And the only thing that Wiegert can say was they had 5 days to clean up because his crime scene detectives have told him, "I'm sorry, guys, nothing happened in this place." Now, Wiegert cannot, Fassbender and Wiegert and Kratz cannot accept that because they have based the entire scenario that Teresa Horbach was raped inside that bedroom. And we know that's the case because that's what Paul Brendan got charged with, right? Because he admitted to raping Teresa Horbach, partaking in a rape, he got charged for it. With Stephen, they couldn't prove it. So they dropped the charges, right? They charged him, of course, for murder and not even for mutilation of a corpse. So it goes to show that despite no forensic evidence of Teresa Horbach ever being in the trailer, Brendan Dassey got charged for it. They could not let Brendan go because, as Big Jeff and Kelly will say, Brendan was Stephen's alibi. So you have to attack the alibi, and they did. Now, just my final comment. Sorry, Jeff. They asked Brendan, well, did Teresa Horbach have pubic hair? In one instance, he goes, yes. They asked him again, did Teresa Horbach have pubic hair? No. Was Teresa Horbach, was she clothed? In one instance, yes. Was she closed in another incident? No. Did you hold her breast? Did you touch her breast? No. How long did you have sex for? 5 minutes. And then what did you do, Brendan? I just stopped. And that's it. Right. What I'm trying to get at here, guys, the entire scenario is completely absurd, stupid, ridiculous, yet Ken Kratz sat next to Sheriff Pagel on national television and just detailed the plot to a horrific movie. And guys, you know where all of this happened? Which movie it was? Kiss the Girls. Right, Big Jeff?
Exactly correct. Exactly correct. One small point. Here's a question for you, Jeff. And I know I hate to put people on the spot and do math on live TV here. How many? So we know that Link and Remiker are in that apartment on Thursday to check it out. How many days are there between Monday and Thursday? Nobody?
That's 3 days there, head cheese. There's 3 days.
So how many days did he have to clean up again? And anybody could have shut up at any time, right? I mean, Coburn was there on the 3rd, right? Wasn't in the apartment. He was not at Ma's, but
the absurdity that any of those, that either of those men or both of them together could clean up a crime scene is also as absurd on its face.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Well, actually, they cleaned up 2 crime scenes, right? The garage, right. the garage, and also the trail, and also the bedroom, and
the burn pit, and the burn pit.
And yep, correct. So you've got to. What the point I'm trying to make is, before Ken Kratz comes out and tells a story like that, you want to make sure that you fact check. He never fact checked. He basically cobbled a story together from what Fassbender and we get concocted, and basically retold that story in front of a live news team without fact checking. And guys, the damage was done.
For help, begging 16-year-old Brendan to stop, that you can stop this. 16-year-old Brendan, under the instruction of Stephen Avery, cuts Teresa Halbach's throat, but she still doesn't die.
The horrible picture of how Teresa Halbach died, painted by a 16-year-old boy, couldn't keep his terrible secret any longer.
Investigators from here at the Calumet County Sheriff's Department and from the Wisconsin Department of Justice interviewed Brendan Dassey twice this week. They used his statements with instructions to put together pieces of a sick puzzle. According to this complaint, Dassey and Avery are accused of choking Teresa Halbach and then dragging her lifeless body outside, throwing her in the burn pit, and shooting her in the head and in the stomach.
Today's development certainly on the minds of many. Here is what some people in the Fox Valley had to say.
I was a little surprised by the age of him, but I wasn't surprised there was somebody else involved.
I think he did help him out. I don't think he was the master behind it, but I think he helped him out.
You know, I believed him at first. Now it's the other way around, you know.
I just want to echo what that gentleman just said. I believed them at first, but now it's the other way around.
That's correct. And to make matters worse, Mr. Kratz knew exactly what he was doing, right? He had to turn the tide against Stephen, right? The main target was Stephen, right? So they had to turn the tide of sympathy against Stephen by telling this horrific story without any fact checking, because Stephen had already put out in the media that he was being set up again. So to turn the tide of sentiment, he had to tell this horrific story. The reality was, Mr. Kratz was actually telling the story of a movie plot. How embarrassing. I could just make the point, what physical evidence against Brendan Dassey? The only thing they had were his own words. There was no physical evidence to back up what Brendan said he did to Teresa Hobart. None whatsoever.
I was just going to say, I was going to focus more on the Brendan side of this because we already know that Ken Kratz and the whole fucking prosecution side are full of shit. We've all been through this over and over again. I think for this rest of this, maybe like part of the episode, I might focus more on just Brendan. When you look at Brendan here, this is a kid that has no idea what the hell is going on. Agree? You can see it. He's sitting there and he's like an empty shell. He's listening, but he's not understanding what exactly is going on. They're talking about life in prison, and it's like he doesn't quite comprehend the realism of what that means. And it echoes back to what I said in one of the first previous episodes, where I said, it wasn't for me. I didn't believe that Brendan ever was said these things about money. Absolutely not. His mind never went there. I was trying to relate it to like something we know, like Damien from, the West Memphis 3. For Brendan, he must have thought that this would be, or he didn't quite understand how deep he was in, and he must have thought, he knew he didn't do anything. So he's listening to them all talk, but at the end of the day, he had to have thought, this is just going to go away eventually. I told them what they needed to hear. I just wanted to go home, but I didn't do anything. And when you see him sitting there so, defeated and empty, you think, Jesus Christ, like, how could they do this to this kid? You can see it. You just look at him and you can see that he has some sort of disability. It blows my mind. It's getting harder watching this, honestly. This could have been our children, man. This could have been one of our own.
That's right. And you see, the scary thing is that there are no safety nets here, right? There was no one asking the real hard questions to check out the veracity of Brendan's statements, right? Only one reporter had the balls to say to Kratz, does the DNA back up the kid's story, right? And Kratz went on for some spiel. He basically didn't answer the question. But Mr. Kratz knew full well that there was nothing forensically backing up Brendan's story at all. And I agree with what you said, Kelly. I reckon Brendan is having an out-of-body experience, thinking, am I really in this? Is this really happening to me? Now, if you notice, Brendan is very quiet, withdrawn, head down. Damien Eccles from the West Memphis 3, he was looking around at everyone and laughing and mocking them, thinking, and because they interviewed him later on when he got released, he goes, what did you do that for, Damien? Because I couldn't believe that people believed that me and my two friends had murdered these three boys. Like, he's thinking, come on, guys, wake up. This is ridiculous. But Brendan, he never had the nous to do that, right? He went through the process thinking, oh my God, what have I put myself into? So yeah, it really is tragic. 100% agreed, Kelly.
Your Honor, as the court I'm sure is well aware, my client is a juvenile. He is a sophomore at Michigan High School. He has never been in trouble in high school as far as I know, or any type of school. He has no juvenile record whatsoever, certainly no criminal record. He has indicated in his statement to the authorities that this was a result, in large part, of being threatened by Mr. Avery, that this was something that was not done willingly by him. In sum, Your Honor, this is a case that involves a young man who himself has been victimized by Mr. Avery. Based upon those circumstances, Your Honor, I think a $250,000 cash bail is excessive.
He admitted his guilt, and he said that Avery was involved as well. So I take that as truth, and that's something that I haven't seen in this case quite yet, especially in Stephen Avery's case.
Just want to make the point that he's going to take that as truth, and from this point on, this is what the Hallbachs rely on as evidence to what happened to their daughter, a coerced confession from a 16-year-old boy with diminished capacity.
Well, I think
that he immediately recanted as soon as he saw his mom.
That's right, and that's a very important point, because Mike Hallbach later on goes, "We love the police." He actually made that statement. We love the police. So in other words, whatever law enforcement were feeding him and his family, he accepted it as gospel truth. He obviously never questioned anything. He never asked any questions. And one of the reporters actually asked him, this will come up later on, and Big Jeff and Kelly will back me up on this. They said, well, did you actually watch the confession, the confession tape? And he goes, no. So he had no idea whether what Brendan was saying was actually making logical sense or was completely false and made up. So in other words, whatever law enforcement said, the Hallbach family agreed with them. And as Mike said, yep, that's the truth. I accept it.
And one more thing is that, as was mentioned a second ago in the clip, Brendan was interviewed twice. We only have the tape from the second interview, because despite the fact that it was required to tape juvenile, interviews, somehow they managed to fuck it up. Right, and I know it's a miracle. I'm sure there's nothing there. No, there's no there. But they didn't manage to press record, or they couldn't figure out how to use the equipment the first time that they did it. At the very beginning of the second interview, which we have the tape for, Wiegert says, "Oh, the rough stuff, that was yesterday." So we have no idea what happened, how much they got in his face, how much they screamed at him. They violated protocol by not having that tape. We don't have that tape, and it's that alone. In some cases, that's reason enough. Right? That's almost like a denial of Miranda. It's just not right.
Yeah, and also we don't know what happened at Fox Hills, because remember, Wiegert and Fassbender brought, I believe it was Blaine, Brendan, and his mum to Fox Hills for protection, in quoted commas. We don't know what happened at Fox Hills. So it's very interesting. I think Brendan was interviewed 3 times in 48 hours for many hours at a time, and without the presence of an attorney or a parent.
But Barb has said there was no interview at Fox Hills. So I'm not really sure whether she means like a deep, long interrogation, or just discussion over dinner, similar to what they did with Blaine, where he denied all of Brendan's statements. So but Barb has denied that. She hasn't really deeply clarified.
Correct.
Whether there was no contact at all, but she says there wasn't enough contact in her mind to let it rise to an interview. But
correct.
Yeah.
I think one of the aspects of that line of questioning with Brendan is that, in any case, if you look at the law enforcement standpoint of it, he said no how many times? He said no, I didn't do it. No, wasn't there. And he let them bully a correct answer that they wanted out of him, and then recant. So he goes back to his no, I didn't do it. How does that value equal out? That I can say, no, I didn't do it 1,000 times, but I say, yes, I did it 1 time, and that cancels out all those other times I said no? Is this a gotcha game that we're playing, or is this justice?
Well, it's a gotcha game. It's a gotcha game, and when he finally says something that they like, and they get him to draw pictures, then they have something to hang their hats on, legally, not morally or ethically, but legally they have something to hang their hats on.
Correct. Basically, to answer your question, Jeff, the way they strategized against Brendan was actually very, very clever. They basically said to Brendan a couple of things that I think really spooked him. They kept on telling him, "You're lying. Your mum told us that you're going to tell us the truth." Whenever Brendan told the truth according to Brendan, i.e. what he did that day, which was basically get off the bus, go home, then later go and see Stephen and help him out, clean a few things from the yard and start a fire, and then he went home. He helped Stephen clean up the garage. So in other words, it was just a trivial night. The investigators, Fassbender and Wiegert, kept on saying to him, "Brendan, we already know. We already know what happened." And Brendan's thinking, wait a minute, why are they questioning me if they already know what happened? And the other important point that the investigator said to Brendan, "Oh, Brendan, what's going to happen when Stephen dumps it all on you?" Right? So, in other words, Brendan's thinking, wait a minute, so my uncle really did kill Teresa Hallbart. Well, if he did it, I wasn't there. So what? Now Brendan's thinking, my uncle is now going to dump it all on me. So as you can see, Brendan kept on changing his narrative to suit what Fassbender and Wiegert wanted to hear. And as Big Jeff alluded to, when Brendan said, "Oh yeah, I did this," the investigator said, no, Brendan, that's not quite right. Because remember, Brendan said, "We took her out to the side of the garage and we shot her there." And the investigators go, "No, Brendan, that's not quite right. Something happened somewhere else," until eventually they went into the shed. So in other words, Fassbender and Wiegert were cleverly guiding Brendan into telling a narrative that the investigators can write down, hand over to Kratz, and Kratz will tell it as a story and as gospel truth.
And there's one more aspect I think that's very important there too, is there's a very, very good reason why they needed to lead him into the garage, isn't there, Dr. Silver?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you've got the magic finding of Ida Maffel, okay, which magically ties everything together.
I just watched the thing with Fassbender, and he said, "Well, we didn't see it. It's so small. It could have been just a piece of dirt.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what he said."
Yep, pure garbage.
But it was interesting because the same reporter that's up on the screen, not a few minutes ago in the documentary, said they took her lifeless body outside and shot her in the head and in the stomach in the burn pit. Where did he get that from?
Yeah, correct. And don't forget,
you can never find out MFL if that's the way things happened, right?
That's correct. 100% correct. Now, they know, we'll talk about this later on, but Fassbender and Wiegert knew that Teresa Hallbart, if those cremains are indeed hers, and I do believe that they are, the investigators knew that the victim had been shot at least twice in the skull because they had cranial bone fragments that had bullet beveling in. And they proved that there was lead that had been deposited, lead flakes that had been deposited in the cranial bone fragments. So Fassbender and Wiegert knew that the victim, Teresa, had been shot at least twice. So they needed to introduce the shooting scenario into Brendan. Now, if you notice, Brendan never, ever mentions a gun shooting Teresa Hallbart ever, until Wiegert asks him about it.
Is distancing itself from one of its best-known cases. Today, that group removed Stephen Avery's picture from its website. Until today, Avery's photo was included with 3 other wrongful convictions uncovered by the group.
Finally, late this afternoon, Dassey's attorney told me over the phone he does plan to remove himself from the case. Turns out he's actually a distant relative of Teresa Halbach.
Hello? This is a collect call from an inmate at the Calumet County Jail. To accept this call, dial 5 now.
Yeah?
Yeah?
What?
Got $100,000 for me?
Where am I going to get it from?
What do you mean?
What's $100,000 for?
You're an attorney for my son.
He's got an attorney.
Well, I just lost him, okay?
How?
What do you mean, how? Because he's second cousins with Halbach.
How can I help?
Why, he sure the fuck didn't do it by himself.
Well, I certainly didn't do it.
Where did Brendan get all this shit from? He's gone down for something that he would have never, ever fucking did.
Oh, what about me?
Why would he say this about you then? You tell me. And he was over by you that night.
That night he came over. We had the bonfire, and he was home by 9 o'clock because Jody called me at 9 o'clock, and I was in the house already.
So you're telling me when he got off the bus, he didn't come over by you with an envelope from out of my mailbox?
No, he did not.
Then what the fuck are they trying to do?
You'd have to ask him.
So my son's going to go to prison.
Well, I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know? Yes, he is going to. Life in prison he's going to get. And he's only 16.
It ain't my fault, is it? It ain't my fault at all. It's by his statement right there. He's got life. I know ain't nothing I can do with that. Why would he admit to something?
How do I know?
Well, that's what you got to figure out.
Well, how am I supposed to figure that out when he's in there and I'm out here?
Well, you go see him and you talk to him and tell him to be straight with you. Where did he get this from? You know, ask questions. Because it didn't happen over by me.
Well, it didn't happen by me either.
No, it didn't happen somewhere else.
Jeff, I think that phone call is so important. So, you know, basically you've got Stephen Avery who's completely clueless as to what the hell just happened, that Brendan somehow entered into the narrative and came up with a story, you know, essentially helping his uncle rape and murder Teresa Halbach. And Stephen's going, well, how in the hell did he get this narrative, right? And so it's amazing how Stephen says, well, it didn't happen by me. It happened somewhere else. So, you know, Stephen is probably wondering, oh my God, what did Brendan hear? Did Brendan hear something that happened to Teresa Halbach and simply retold the story? But if you listen to if you listen to Stephen, he's very, very genuine there. He's definitely not hiding anything. He's completely perplexed about what happened. That's just my opinion.
Well, let's see what you can do and nothing else. If you want me to call you, let Ma know.
Yeah, okay then.
All right then.
All right.
I love you.
Yeah.
Okay then.
Bye.
Bye.
When I first read the report, I was mad and disgusted. But then hearing from Brendan last night, I just changed my whole attitude. I mean, I believe in my son, and I believe he's telling the truth when he told his first statement. And that they interrogated him and made him say what they wanted to hear.
They really should have played. I wonder if we can even insert it. Jeff, we talked about maybe cleaning up the audio of what he actually says at the end of that interview, just to show. I mean, because people who haven't heard that November 6th interview with Brendan, and what he said at the end of that interview, even under very little pressure, right? O'Neill wasn't in his face. So much as he was, kind of confrontational with him and saying, "Oh well, you had to have seen him." And finally, he's like, "I need to get out of it. I need to tell him something." And he says to her, "Oh yeah, we actually had to step out of the driveway so she could drive the RAV4 up."
Okay, so you look out the window and you see her leave. Before you told us you were walking down the driveway, and you had to actually leave from the driveway towards the grass so she could go by you, right? Why did you tell us that? Do you understand where I'm coming from? What's the real story here? Huh? Okay, so why'd you not tell us the truth about when you saw her leaving?
I was scared.
Okay, let's get beyond being scared. Let's get beyond the idea of you getting in trouble and going to jail, because it's not going to happen, okay? Tell us anything more. Did you actually see her leave, or did she stay there?
And that really tells Brendan's story right there, and in my mind, is very much the telltale as to why they went after him. As for the timing of why they went after him, we can talk about that in another, when it comes up in another segment. What the Brendan Dassey, who's not being interrogated because they have an agenda that they're trying to push. It was very important for them to get that confession at that time that they did. Because of item FL, discovery of item FL, hood latch swab, etc. But when he's not under that kind of pressure, the story that he invents just to get them out of his face is telling to me of why exactly they went after him again at this exact time.
I came to pick up Jody. Did you hear me on that talker thing? No, I don't know.
They made a mess, didn't they? Holy shit. Oh my God. I wouldn't even know where to look for my purse because it was on the bed. Yeah. Ah, what a mess. I can't believe they took my purse. It's a good thing I have my ID. Otherwise, I couldn't go see them.
Mr. Avery?
Jody, how are you feeling going in to see Stephen?
Fine.
What are you going to say to him? This is the first time you've seen him, or?
Yes. I really don't want to talk.
Is there anything you'd like us to say?
No.
Can we give you questions for him?
No.
So you've been in jail how long? This is the first time you've seen him in how long? What do you think about the charges he's facing? Is there a reason that you don't want to say anything? Or?
This is no longer purely a circumstantial evidence case based on the new allegations made by the state, and the court would have to characterize the strength of the evidence at this point is greater than it had been in the past.
Things did not go well for Stephen Avery here.
Yeah, that goes to show the importance of Brendan's coerced confession. You notice what the judge said? This has now gone beyond circumstantial evidence. So in other words, Brendan's recollections was the tipping point, because what Brendan provided was a narrative of what happened to Teresa Horbach. Up to that stage, before Brendan got involved with his recollections and his coerced confession, was that the state had no idea where Teresa Horbach had been killed, right? They had no idea. So potentially, when Stephen was saying that, hey, look, all this evidence has been planted against me, that held pretty strong, right? But now you had Stephen's nephew give a blow-by-blow narrative of what happened to the victim, Teresa Horbach. That was a pivotal point in the case. And the judge now says, hey, we're beyond circumstantial evidence. This is exactly what the state was after. Very devastating for Stephen and, of course, for Brendan.
Avery, sexual assault, false imprisonment, and kidnapping, based on statements made by Avery's nephew, Brendan Dassey. Another blow to the defense, the judge will not allow Avery's parents to post property as part of Stephen's bond. Now the judge not only denied the property request for bail, he increased it from $500,000 to $750,000.
The court knows, I know, perhaps some in the public or some in the media even have forgotten that he's innocent. As he sits here today, he is legally presumed innocent. I mean, we can dress him up in something that makes him look like he jumped off a Monopoly game board or something. No, he's a get out of jail free card come to life, but he's innocent.
I've always been taught not to judge a book by its cover, and knowing what I know about Stephen Avery, what's between the covers isn't very good. So regardless of what he's wearing, it doesn't make any difference. He's still the same person. So, and I think the public knows that.
There ain't no reason why he's going to take the property back. That's just like I'm going to run and put my family out on the street. I'm not going to do that. That's ridiculous. They just don't want me out. They got me looking like an animal, and they think that I'm going to run. Innocent people don't run.
If I could just make the comment, this is also a very important pivotal point in what Chuck is about to say. Now, have a close listen to what he says, because it's important. Now, remember, we already had Barb, his sister, appear on TV believing that her brother was guilty. Just have a quick listen. Have a listen to what Chuck says. That's very important.
I'm pretty positive in my head right now, in my mind, that he did do it. but I don't see what made him do that. I don't know. Maybe as well with the 18 years he spent in prison, maybe he got stuff like other inmates did and everything else, and that, I don't know. Only them two know what went on that night.
If you notice, Jeff, it doesn't exude confidence, does it? When your own brother says, only those two know what went on that night. You notice that Chuck doesn't defend his brother and his nephew to say, there's no way they had committed this crime against Teresa Hallbach. So even Chuck now adds an element of doubt. So now we've got two family members, his sister and his brother, commenting that it's likely that Stephen had done it.
That's right. You know, in the previous episode, I talked about this concept of everyone being against you, and everywhere you turn, you see the same people, and they've turned against you. And now Manitowoc County has turned his own family against him in two instances, with his sister and with his brother. And you got to imagine what that must feel like.
But yeah, and I mean, the fact of the matter is that Earl Avery as well, even though they might not have shown him on camera, his wife Candy was on early, shortly after Stephen was arrested, well before March. Candy was on TV, essentially bad-mouthing Stephen, and Earl on the phone calls, the jail calls, is not exactly, supportive to Stephen. It's pretty clear that Earl is accusatory towards Stephen on those phone calls. So it's two brothers and a sister.
I think it was the goal of law enforcement to create this divide. Having this divide is eliminating that risk factor of the 1985 case where he had 16 witnesses and support of all the family knowing he didn't do it. They knew this time going into it, that came under scrutiny the first time. Let's make sure we box that down. We kind of separate them and like cause that divide where they're not talking. They the thing with Stephen is they like him to talk, but then they don't like him to talk. That's why they put him in, didn't they put him in like protected custody or some kind of lockdown in certain times when things were happening so he couldn't communicate with
solitary
the family?
Confinement. They put him in solitary confinement when Brendan was giving his interview.
Yeah,
Stephen,
exactly.
They put Stephen in solitary confinement when Brendan was given that second interview.
Yeah. And that's what I think their motive was, is to create this family divide where, Stephen's feeling more isolated. They're all turning on each other. They don't want the support of the family because as a unit, they're more powerful. And they know that because if the family start talking and really sitting down as a family unit and go, hang on a minute, were you really there? Well, no. And then kind of constructing the timeline together, they knew that could become powerful for them because then they'll go, hang on a minute, Brendan wasn't even there. And that's what they feared. They feared them all coming together and alibying each other. With them having broken pieces like it was, they could manipulate the timeline. Bringing the family together would have kind of glued it all together where they were helping each other remember things. They didn't need that. They definitely couldn't afford that to happen because then their whole timeline would have been destroyed.
Yep, 100% correct.
My opinion, of course.
Yep, 100% correct. And we've read the very early statements from Chuck and Earl, and it's pretty obvious that law enforcement goes really hard on both Chuck and Earl. Basically, what they were implying was, okay, did you know that Teresa Hallbach's vehicle was down there? Essentially saying to both Chuck and Earl, are you part of this? Were you part of the murder of Teresa Hallbach? So Chuck and Earl learned pretty quickly better to point the finger at Stephen than put to put the spotlight on them. And Kelly's 100% correct, right? Imagine if Mama Avery had come out and said, that's impossible. I delivered the mail to Stephen. And I remember there was a report that said that it was Dolores that delivered the mail to Stephen that day. Imagine if she had come out in the public and said, oh, no, that's incorrect. My nephew never did that. My grandson never did that. I'm the one who delivered the mail. There's no way that Brendan could have done so and so to weaken the narrative of the state. But now, as Kelly and Big Jeff alluded to, you've now got family members who are going against Stephen, which doesn't look good, because in 1985, like Kelly said, he had 16 alibi witnesses. The family was saying, hey, no, that can't be right. Stephen was with us. Not one of them came out and defended Stephen to say that narrative can't be right, right? They're basically going along with what law enforcement said, which is very devastating for Stephen.
I mean, in my mind, I feel like there was probably a lot of threats, like, hey, are you guys going to lose the business over this? Just play along.
They told they told Earl, so you're operating the crusher without a proper license and you're burning tires without a proper license. Do you realize that we can shut down your business? So you're 100% correct. They threatened both Chuck and Earl to losing their business. In other words, they're basically saying, you toe the line, buddy, or you're in trouble just as well. You can easily be a co-conspirator in this. No problems at all.
She don't offer to come up to see her grandson, and she doesn't talk to me. More or less, I think they disown me.
I went through it more than she did, really. I spent a lot of sleepless nights. A lot of crying. Now I gotta start it all over again.
They got our family all torn right apart. It's not right. Got my wife tore apart. You'll never be the same. Never be the same.
Talk to me.
I miss you.
I miss you too. What's the matter?
Hmm?
What's the matter?
I don't know. Depends if I get out or not. If I don't, I don't know.
You gotta have faith.
It's driving me up the wall.
I know.
You know, especially when I can't talk to you.
I know.
You know, all I want to do is now is get this all over with and move.
Yeah.
Me and you. And hopefully we can get your kid and be a family.
Well, let's just concentrate on you first.
You know? But I like it all.
I know.
I knew I should have never moved to Manitowoc. But then I went to meet you. You're the only person I want in this whole world.
Okay.
Huh?
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
That's all?
Well, me too. I tell you that all the time now.
No. I'd like to hear it more.
Yeah. Okay.
If you look at this case, if Mr. Avery is convicted of it, I guess, you know, you can look at the other side of that where if he wouldn't have been released, Miss Hallbuck would still most likely be here.
Now, and I'm sure Big Jeff and Kelly will agree, this is truly one of the most disgusting things I've ever heard in my life. So the MTSO put Stephen in jail for something he didn't do. And you notice that Herman is now trying to come up with a justification as to why Stephen Avery was in jail. So in his mind, he's saying, well, see, if we didn't get him released, if he didn't get exonerated, he still would be sitting in prison, right? Wrongfully convicted, of course, for something he didn't do. That's the sexual assault on Penny Bernstein. But the good thing is that Teresa Hallbuck would have still been potentially alive. So in other words, he's trying to justify one wrong thing with another, right? Now, have you ever heard of a situation whereby a senior law enforcement officer is trying to justify the state deliberately targeting Stephen Avery and putting him in prison in 1985, right? So how in God's name is a senior law enforcement officer like Herman coming up with a Nostradamus moment like that? Clearly, my mind is blown. Thank you.
If he wouldn't have been released, Miss Hallbuck would still most likely be here.
And then you start thinking to yourself, boy, maybe it was good he was in all that time. As unjust as it was, if he did this, what might he have done during that time? And you start questioning the whole system. You can't put people in prison because you think someday they might do something wrong or even horrible or heinous,
The thing that bothers me most about his comments here, Dundrum, is the fact that he's supposed to be the leader of this task force. So he's supposed to be more or less an expert in this field. And he's coming to these conclusions and he's baffled and he's having these philosophical things. Oh, I don't know what to think. And it's just unbelievable. And yet he should know that, no, Stephen is innocent until proven guilty. Nothing is solved. We don't know yet. The facts are still out.
But
that level just kind of gets me because he's supposed to be an expert in this Avery task force, and then he just drops the ball.
But what these two dickheads failed to say. Oh, by the way, when Stephen Avery was in prison for something he didn't do, the real perpetrator, Gregory Allen, continued his sexual deviancy for an extra 10 years and raped 2 women and then got convicted for 60 years. Now, wouldn't it have been remarkable had we arrested Gregory Allen back in 1985? All the sexual deviant acts he had committed while free would not have happened. Not one of those fucking idiots ever said that. They tried to clear their conscience by saying, well, maybe it was a good thing that Stephen was in prison. Unbelievable.
Gundrum sounds like the typical spineless politician, doesn't he? I don't know who he's trying to justify with his sort of butterfly effect nonsense that he's spouting right now, but he's not even convincing. I don't know who he's trying to convince because he's not convincing me. I don't know who is he trying to convince with what he's saying.
Well, they're basically trying to clear their conscience, right? Because Gundrum obviously would have been pro Stephen Avery, right, initially, saying, oh, look at these bad things that the police did, the state did, well, we're going to come up with a new law, etc., etc. And then, now that Stephen has been convicted of murdering Teresa Hallbuck, he's now backpedaling, saying, oh, well, maybe it wasn't such a good idea to release him from prison.
But what's his point, Dr. Silkman? The system is perfect after all. I guess I don't understand his point.
It's because Big Jeff, people are now going to stir and point a finger at Gundrum and say, "See, it wasn't worth all your effort coming up with all these new laws, etc., because Stephen Avery's scum." That's basically what they're trying to do.
But it doesn't make any sense because the laws are to prevent, to preserve evidence, to prevent wrongful conviction. All that stuff is good.
Correct.
If Stephen had done this, the laws would still be good.
That's right. But unfortunately, Stephen Avery's name has become mud. And even the Innocence Project took off his photograph, right? So now what they're doing is that they're de-engineering Stephen Avery. They're now all they're casting him aside. They don't want anything to do with him until he gets exonerated again, and then they'll all jump back on.
Yeah, I mean, he's not very convincing to me. If that's the argument he's using to convince himself and clear his own conscience, I think he probably needs another couple hours at it, if you ask me.
He's just explaining. I mean, you asked Jeff, like, what's he showing? He's showing the political side of it, right? That the political side can do to a case of this magnitude, where he just falls in line because he doesn't want to get scorched from it. He doesn't want to.
He doesn't want the blowback. He doesn't want the blowback.
The words of his argument and the points of his argument are ludicrous if you just listen to him. That's my point.
And as I said earlier, it's like this is someone who's supposed to be an expert on the law, who's supposed to have a good take on it, who knows the basics, the ones that we laid out, saying innocent until proven guilty. And the other fact is, whether this trial is happening or not, he was still falsely imprisoned for 18 years. That doesn't wash away. It doesn't trump it in default. Oh, well, that doesn't matter anymore because he committed a new crime. This isn't Minority Report.
But this is the logic. This is the logic that Kacerik and Vogel would have used, right? Oh, see, he was a bad guy after all. So, there's nothing to worry about. We're all off the hook. And he's talking like a politician, right? So he'll go on the side, and Michael Griesbach does the same thing, right? In 1985, so-and-so was really bad against Stephen Avery. I really feel sorry for Stephen Avery. Then he gets charged and convicted for the murder of Teresa Horbach. Oh, Stephen, he's a really bad man. So in other words, he'll jump the fence, who go on the side where the grass is greener. Typical. And a lot of people did exactly the same thing.
A little too sophisticated for the Stephen I knew. Boy, it seems to me that what happened all those years has a lot to do with it, because it developed him into somebody else that he wasn't when he started.
Even if he did have anger for being in prison all this time, anybody would have anger. I'd have anger. I mean, I would be hell mad. But that doesn't mean I'd go around and kill somebody. I'd sue just like he is doing, suing.
Sorry, guys, to stop it so quickly, but I think that they just described the name of the documentary, Making a Murderer. And under that logic, if you follow their faulty logic, that the one that Ken Kratz tends to lean towards, that the 18 years of prison created a monster, and that's why Teresa Halbach died. Well, then this Manitowoc County is responsible for it because they put him in there under false pretenses. So they are the ones, they made the murderer. They are the ones who making a murderer. There you go. Jeff?
Like the Dr. Frankenstein. Right. They created the Frankenstein's monster.
If that's the logic that they want to roll with, then that's what you get.
That's a very good point, actually, because that's exactly what Fassbender and Wiegert said to Stephen on November the 9th. Remember, in the interrogation session, they said, yes, Stephen, we know you went to prison for something you didn't do. That does things to a man's mind. Basically trying to get him to admit, yeah, because I was incarcerated for something I didn't do, I went into a murderous rage and I decided to rape and murder, dismember and cremate Teresa Hallbart. So that's what they, and believe it or not, Fassbender and Uyghur said, yeah, we would understand.
So good job, Kasurek. You locked up a man and you turned him into an evil monster. You're responsible.
Correct.
Two weeks before I was released from jail, investigators were going to bring in pictures to show me of Teresa's body and how it was burnt, and there was still muscle tissues on the bones. There was a lot of pressure they were putting on me to turn against Stephen.
I've been doing this job a long time. I've met a lot of interesting people, a lot of people that are similar to Steve, but I've never met somebody as cold-blooded as him. To think what he did to that girl. Sit and think about that for a minute. Think about her family.
I do all the time.
I hope you do. Because by sticking up for him, what does that make you look like?
Well, I know, but
He killed her. He killed her. He's the only one who sees her in that time frame. He's the last one to see her. Think about that. She just disappears? Yeah, she disappears because he killed her. That's the kind of person you want to spend the rest of your life with?
When Jody was in jail, she put a request in not to talk to the investigators anymore, meaning Mark and Tom. And 3 days later, they went after Brendan.
Let's see it. Why just have a seat, Brendan? Tom and I just gotta stop out for a minute, and then we'll be right in, okay? Okay.
You've got to really, if you haven't, you must listen to that interview that Uyghur did with Jody. It's one of the most disgusting, shameful things I've ever heard, right? And you see the way the what Uyghur was talking about? In that interview, he even insinuated that Jody had to be careful because Stephen is likely to kill her own daughter, right? That's the type of logic that Uyghur was using in order to turn Jody against Stephen. So quite clearly here, what law enforcement were doing was they were trying to set up a division, a war within the family, such that in the end, everyone would agree and accept that Stephen had committed this violent act, right? Now, remember, the case against Stephen at that time was purely circumstantial. Now, after Jody basically said, get stuffed, I don't want to talk to you guys, look who else they've got now on the couch, the same couch. It's now Brendan. So all they're doing is they're working down the chain until they find the weakest link. And boom, out pops Brendan.
In my mind, Brendan was a victim of the state's failing case against Stephen. They needed Brendan, and they needed him right then. And we heard earlier why. It was because of the property bond. I will go down. That's the hill I die on. That hearing that happened was that we saw that the property bond got rejected. Was scheduled to happen anyway, right? That didn't happen because of Brendan. That happened because that was a normal proceeding in Stephen's trial, where they had gotten enough money. The Averys had gotten enough money for putting up the property bond and gone through all the shit that Kratz put them through. The judge was scheduled to rule on it, and there was a case, just weeks ago where a woman who was accused of murder got out on her own property bond, and had not Brendan confessed, Stephen probably would have been out on that property bond. But because he confessed, not only did they quote unquote deny the property bond, but the property value wasn't enough anyway to cover the $750 that they raised it up to. So they needed something, and they needed something then, and this is what they did.
And yes, that's a really good point, Big Jeff. And remember, Kathleen Zellner in MAM 2 said that Brendan Dassey was the greatest plant ever. So he was a plant. He was actually used as a plant. And that's, when you think about it, that's very, very apt.
All right.
They've been working for about 4 months trying to build a case against Stephen Avery. And there were still a fair number of people.
Oh, hold on a second. In what universe do you go after somebody's primary alibi 4 months later, right? If you want to break down somebody's case, you go after their alibi right away. Brendan was Stephen's alibi, right? Without Brendan, they're looking at this fire that supposedly somebody got burned up in, and they don't see anything, right? If they can't get Brendan, I didn't see anything. They have no case, right? They have no case without Brendan. Why are you waiting 4 months? Because he was their last resort.
I think Stephen Avery might be innocent. You know, there may be more to what he says than not. And one of the things that helped support Avery at that time was that Brendan Dassey was Steve's alibi.
They knew they could get to Brendan because he's a slow learner. They told him that they talked to me and it was okay for them to talk to him. And it wasn't. They never called me. They never left me know. They just went and done it.
We know there's some things you left out, and we know there's some things that maybe weren't quite correct that you told us. Okay, we've been investigating this a long time. We pretty much know everything. That's why we're talking to you again today. We really need you to be honest this time with everything. Okay, if in fact you did some things which we believe some things may have happened that you didn't want to tell us about, it's okay. As long as you be honest with us, it's okay. If you lie about it, that's going to be problems. Okay? Does that sound fair?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
The two detectives developed this theme of honesty, and they repeatedly, dozens of times in that interview, they say to Brendan, now be honest, okay? You know how important it is to be honest. But when you watch the videotapes, it's clear to me, I think, that when they say to Brendan, be honest, what they sort of mean is, don't tell us that, tell us something else, something that fits their theory of the crime.
I think you went over to his house, maybe you asked him to get his mail. Something in here is missing.
Well, when I got the mail, there was like a envelope in there with his name on it.
All right. Okay, now we're going. But what did you do?
I knocked on the door and he answered it.
Yeah, and then what?
I gave it to him and then I left.
Come on now. You just heard screaming over there. You're making this hard on us and yourself. Be honest. You went inside, didn't you? Yeah. You went in the trailer?
Mm-hmm.
You're nodding.
I think the detectives in this case were unaware that the degree to
They're
which
just
they were
leading
shaping
him into that.
Brendan's
It's
statements.
insane.
That's why it's very important.
They're like, when you watch that, they're leading him into where they need him to go. Be honest. You went in there, didn't you? That was his cue to go, okay, this is where I'm going. This is where they want me to go. Yes. If I don't understand how people just don't see this for what it is. It's bullshit.
The biggest lie of all.
It's horrible.
The biggest lie of all was if you just tell the truth, it'll be okay, right?
Yeah.
That was the biggest fucking lie of all.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, the biggest bullshitters in that room were Fassbender and Wiegert, not Brendan.
Exactly. Well, if you say,
Amen.
tell us the truth and there's nothing that's going to happen to you, and then you tell them a version and they don't like it, and then they say, tell the truth, and then you tell them what they wanted to hear. Do you see what I'm saying? That's why the lawyer points out so well that they're making this correlation that telling the truth doesn't mean tell the truth anymore in this scenario. It means tell us something else, and you won't get in trouble, because we already said if you say what we want you to say, you won't get in trouble. And
That's correct.
it's a complete betrayal of everything that police officers should be sworn to do.
Correct. They were reliant on Brendan being malleable, right, and very suggestible. So here, as you can see, the Fassbender and Wiegert were working in tandem. They were telling the narrative, and all they needed Brendan to do was to nod his head and say yes. So Brendan Dassey, in effect, had become the video camera of the events that transpired to Teresa Halbach. So he was their internal guy, basically retelling the narrative of what had happened to Teresa. Because up to that point, forensically, they had no idea, right? The forensic team went through the trailer, went through the garage, and would have come out and said, boys, nothing happened here. So they were totally reliant on Brendan to tell them the missing narrative, the missing story that they didn't have. And unfortunately, Brendan fell right into it.
And to take a look at the record of the interrogation to see who mentions particular facts first. Do they come from Brendan without any help from the police, or do they in fact come first from the police? And there are several occasions in these interrogations where apparently crucial bits of information are mentioned first by the police and not by Brendan Dassey.
Where they really messed up was when they tried to get the one fact, the one absolutely secret fact that nobody in the public yet knew, was how Teresa Halbach died. Nobody knew that they had evidence that she had been shot in the head. If they could get Brendan to say that, then that would be dynamite, because no one knew that. And here, if he came out and said it, then it must be the truth. And so they kept asking him, come on, Brendan, something else happened to her now. We know something else happened to her. And eventually they got more specific. What else happened to her? Something happened to her head. Brendan, tell us. This is after he says, well, we stabbed her. Well, yeah, but what else happened to her? Something happened to her head. Hint, hint.
Come on. Something with the head. Brendan.
Yeah.
What else did you guys do? Come on.
What he made you do, Brendan, we know he made you do something else.
What was it? What was it?
We have the evidence, Brendan. We just need you to be honest with us.
That he cut off her hair.
He cut off her hair. Okay, what else?
What else was done to her head?
That he punched her.
What else?
You know, you look at him, he's just sort of sitting there, these long pauses, and you can almost see him, the wheels in his head turning however slowly, saying, what do they want from me? And he's guessing.
It's okay. What do you make you do?
Cut her.
Cut her where?
On her throat.
You cut her throat. What else happens to her?
Hear that hesitation then? cut her throat. Like it's almost like he wasn't even sure he was even going to go there until that moment. Did you guys capture that? Like there was that hesitation. He was. I don't think he even thought he was going to go there. It just kind of went there.
Yeah, I mean,
Cutting
He
her
was
on the
like,
head.
I cut her. Like it was like I'm going to
he's
go through every scenario here until I get it right, and then you can hear it.
He's going through a shopping list of all the things that you could do to a head. Cut her head, choke her, punch her, cut her throat. He's going through the shopping list. Now notice he never ever mentions a shooting scenario. Now, what person is going to ever forget shooting someone in the head at least twice at close range? Anybody? You're never ever going to forget that. And these two dickheads, they know that Brendan knows nothing. So what Fassbender and Wiegert know are two cranial headshots, right? They've got the cranial bones. They know there's evidence of two headshots. You look at Brendan. He's got no idea what they're after. None whatsoever.
For us to believe you. Come on, Brendan. What else? We know, we just need you to tell us.
That's all I can remember.
All right, I'm just going to come out and ask you, who shot her in the head?
He did.
Why didn't you tell us that?
Because I couldn't think of it.
Did you hear what he said? Did you hear what he said?
Because I couldn't think of it.
Because I couldn't think of it. Right?
Because I couldn't think of it.
He told the truth. He couldn't think of it. He's thinking, what do these idiots want me to say? I mean, imagine if he had said, oh, yeah, we dyed her hair purple while we're at it. That's all,
Lipstick on her.
That's all he had to say to make it just the complete macabre bullshit that it was. And then Wiegert clearly had had enough. And he let out the most important piece of evidence that you never, ever tell a suspect. It came from the investigator's mouth, not from Brendan.
Yeah.
Right, and Brendan says right there before, he says, that's all I can remember. And he's like, well, that's the end of the road. He has to come out with something because Brendan has just said, that's all I remember. Shutting him down.
And like Silkman said before, you wouldn't forget shooting someone in the head. If this kid had been involved in any kind of, responsibility of Teresa's death, the first thing is what else happened. You'd straight up be like, we used a gun. Like the gun scenario would have been used. He would have alluded to it almost immediately because that is allegedly her method of death. You'd get straight to the point. You wouldn't be sitting there talking about all these other factors that you can't even prove even could have even happened. We can't even prove, let's say theoretically she was strangled before someone ended up taking her life by a gun. You can't prove that because they removed that part of the evidence. All you're left is the skull with what appears to be, a bullet wound or bullet wounds. Like Dr. Silkman said, there's 2 possible entry wounds. So mine gets me every time. It just absolutely rattles me. This is the moment where you'd think they would say, we're done, mate. Go out.
Go home.
See you later. Go home to your mum.
home.
This is ridiculous. We've just wasted however long we've been sitting here for now. Go home. This isn't going anywhere. And for the simple fact, they just gave up the biggest piece of evidence that they had to him.
But
They're
Kelly,
done.
But Kelly, did you realize that I think it was on the 27th, it was Fassbender who let slip out about a gun. and must have turned around to Fassbender and said, "You want to talk about that now?" and completely changed the topic, right? Because up to that stage, Brendan had never mentioned a gun. Fassbender accidentally let out about that they were going to mention about a gun, but Wiegert shut him down. That was in the interview before March the 3rd, right? The 1st of March, which is very, very interesting that Wiegert shut down Fassbender. And look what Wiegert does now. On this interview, he lets out about the gun. Crazy.
Because he knows he's choked out. He knows at this very moment, they've choked out. And if he didn't realize it, then he should never have been an investigator. Because if you
Correct.
can't see that, then you are so shit at your job, quit. Come on
100%.
now. And by the way, stop fucking touching him. That's all I keep screaming is stop
Correct.
touching him. Keep your hands to yourself. Fuck off.
But that's part of the read technique. The read technique is that you get close. And if you notice, Wiegert gets close to Brendan. Wiegert actually sits next to Brendan, and Wiegert is patting and touching Brendan. Now, if you're an introvert, that they're threats. They are threats. If you're not used to people being in your space, you are threatened by those actions.
Tell us about that then.
I think Wiegert is the one who actually got frustrated and said, all right, I'm just going to come out and say it. Who shot her in the head? And of course the answer is he did, but by then he's blown the one piece of secret evidence that could have corroborated Brendan Dassey's story by feeding it to him himself.
Hey, Brendan, need to use the bathroom or anything? You sure? Need anything else? Sandwich or anything? Did you get your soda?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll be in about 2 minutes, okay?
I got a question though.
Sure.
How long is this going to take?
It shouldn't take a whole lot longer.
Do you think I can get there before 1:29?
Probably not. What's at 1:29?
Well, I had a project due in 6 hours.
Okay. We'll worry about that later, okay? All right. I'll be back in a few minutes, okay?
Okay.
Another troubling aspect was the fact that Brendan didn't really understand the precariousness of his own position. He has no understanding that he's not going to be released from custody at this point. He has just admitted to really awful crimes.
You know, obviously, that we're police officers, okay? And because of what you told us, we're going to have to arrest you. Did you kind of figure that was coming? For what you did, we can't let you go right now.
Just look at his reaction. He's just been told that he's going to be arrested, and nothing changed. Did you see he didn't have a reaction? Is it just me?
But Jeff, look what he said. Is only for 1 day, right? Sorry, Kelly.
No, you go. Absolutely, you go. Your Honor.
Now, does this indicate to you a person who understands the gravity of what he just admitted to?
Not even close.
We don't know that at this time. But let me tell you something, Brendan. You did the right thing. Okay? By being honest, you can at least sleep at night now. So I'm sure you had some difficulty with that.
I just want to throw it out there, though.
You did the right thing here.
I realize I'm not going to let this one go. I wasn't going to say it, but I'm not going to let it go. He would be feeling probably somewhat guilty right now, but it's not guilty of killing Teresa. It's guilty because in his mind somewhere, he knows he told a porky. He's been telling porkies. And in all seriousness, though, that's probably why he thinks he's in trouble, because it's not that he killed her. It's because he just told them what they needed to hear. That's why he hasn't quite comprehended how deep this really is. He's just thinking, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm being punished because, okay, I talked a bit of shit. Like, because he knows he didn't kill her. So he knows that he was just sitting there agreeing to things he didn't do. And and that's what they said. Do you know? Did you see this coming? And he kind of gave that little nod. Yeah, he knew what was coming because he knew he just talked like a few porkies. He knew he didn't do it. So I think that's, and when we hear that phone later, which we'll get to, when you hear that snippet of the, Barb says, well, did you do it, Brendan? And he goes, well, some of it. That guilt is like to say that's his confession, like Dr. Silkman said. No, he's saying some of it, and he doesn't elaborate on that some of it. Some of it was true, though. He did go over there, and
That's
he did
correct.
probably do the cleaning up and did do the bit of a burning, but it wasn't to the degree of murdering her. But because Brendan's simple-minded as a 16-year-old with a lower IQ, that's for him, his interpretation of I did some of it was based on some of the truth. And the truth was I went over there, I helped him clean up because he called, and that's some of it. But I just think that he knows, for him, he's just thinking, oh, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble because I've just spun a bit of a yarn. You would. Kids do it all the time. You steal a cookie, they steal a cookie from the cookie jar. They've been confronted. They know they're in trouble. Half the time, they're not even like angry that they're, being that they've been called out. It's the fact that they got caught, But for him,
Yes.
it's the fact that he knows that he's just put himself in a bit of a situation. And I just think that I wanted to approach that because I think right now, I can't speak of what his mind is thinking because I just don't know. But at the back of his mind, he knows what he said wasn't true. There would be an element of some kind of remorse and guilt for doing that at that moment.
100% correct. And I think if the way I've worked it out is actually quite simple. I believe that Fassbender and Wiegert had convinced Brendan of Stephen's guilt, right? So in Brendan's mind, he's convinced, or they convinced him, that Stephen had committed this act. But what Brendan can't understand is this. Well, wait a minute. When I was there, nothing happened. I didn't see Teresa. I didn't see her vehicle. I didn't see anything, right? And so Fassbender and Wiegert fed him that narrative. He agreed to the narrative, right? Because remember, they threatened him. They said to him, well, what's going to happen when Stephen now is going to dump all of this on you, right? And just to show how crazy this is, right? Twice, Brendan said, first of all, he says, do you think I'll be able to get back at school? I've got a project I've got to hand in, right? Think about what he's just confessed to, and he thinks he's going back to school. Secondly, he goes, all right, I'm going to jail, but is it going to be for 1 day? 1 day for rape, murder, and burning someone. He thinks he's gone to prison for 1 day because in his mind, he's thinking, well, I just told a story, a big porky, like Kelly said. I've done nothing nefarious. Surely they can see that it's all rubbish. He had no idea the trouble he got himself into.
By telling us what happened, okay? Just remember that in the future, okay? You need to be honest.
This dramatic press conference that children should not listen to this, it's so terrible to hear, was pure fantasy. Looking at that press conference, you would have expected that young boy who was holding this in for months and was just had to unburden himself with this terrible experience that he had was emotionally upset and came out with this whole long story, when in fact there's not an iota of emotion expressed by the guy. He never cries. He's not upset at all. He's not coming out with any narrative. It's one sentence or one word responses to their questions the entire way.
What happened if his story is different?
What do you mean?
Like, if his story is like different, like I never did nothing or something.
Did you? Huh?
Not really.
What do you mean, not really?
They got to my head.
It's not
Just
that there was
stop
a
it
lack
there.
of physical evidence.
They couldn't get in there fast enough.
Exactly. Look how quickly they come in. They know, uh-oh, he's recanting. We can't have that. We've just got him where we need him to, and now he's starting to freak out. And I like the fact that, or not, I don't like the fact this is terrible. I need to use better words, still too early in the morning. But the fact that he says, what if Stephen's story is different to mine? So he's starting to now realize that, okay, there's a possibility, you know, it's
They can
not going
prove
to
I
make
wasn't there,
sense.
yeah.
You can prove I'm not there. You can prove I'm not, you know, this has all been made up. Oh, this will all kind of go away. So he's already realizing that his story he's given potentially could be completely different to what Stephen's about to say. That's not a boy that's confident with a narrative if he's not even sure what Stephen's going to say. Because if Stephen had done it with him, there wouldn't be a need for wondering what's going to happen, because they know the truth. He has no idea.
And that bears out in the phone call that we listened to earlier between Stephen and Barb, saying, hey, it didn't happen by me, right? And you could hear it in Stephen's voice. He was genuine. He had no idea what Brendan was talking about. And you know what the sad thing is? Brendan has now just realized what he's just done. Right? He caught himself in a lie.
When they showed Brendan's confession to the jury, guess what part they omitted?
This part right here
How
with
did
his mum.
How did you guess? I can't believe you got it on the first try, Tony. It's like you've seen this before.
I know. It's a bit of a shocker. But you know what? The sad thing is the defense agreed to it as well. The defense agreed not to show the entire interview. Now, think about it, right? Your entire case against Brendan is based on one interview, and they didn't show the entire lot.
It's mind-boggling.
Brendan, is that there was a wealth of physical evidence to disprove the statements attributed to him. You know, he describes this horrible, bloody episode of stabbing and throat slitting on a bed while this woman supposedly is handcuffed to the bed. There's no blood. There's no blood on the mattress. There's no blood on the sheets. There's no blood on the floor. There's no blood on the wall. There's no blood. Didn't happen.
Brendan? My name is Dennis Jacobs. I'm a detective with Manitowoc County. Do you have any weapons or anything on you?
Just some stuff that I can give to my mom, like a CD player, man.
That wouldn't be a weapon, though. Do you have like a little pocket knife, anything like that?
He doesn't. You see what I'm saying? He doesn't understand the questions that are being leveled at him. Do you have any weapons on you? You mean like a CD player?
Anything like that?
No.
Can you stand up? I just want to pat you down real quick, just to make sure. Well, that's nothing that's going to hurt me. Okay, that's fine.
Brendan's young, had no prior experience with the police, and he's not a bright kid. He's a soft, quiet kid who's easily pushed around, whether you mean to push him around or not. He was an easy mark. And understand that Brendan is potentially a crucial defense witness because he's supposedly there at this bonfire that night. If you can turn him from a defense witness into a prosecution witness, it's a twofer if you're the police.
Can I just say something?
If he testifies against...
Did you hear that strategy, though, how he's saying the prosecution has used, the witness into like a, what was it? What did he say? Like a prosecution witness. Like he's become the, they've taken away the alibi of Stephen and they've now used him. So that strategically, it really hurts the defense. I know it's a little bit
witness.
early.
He's the star witness now.
He's now, yep. But here's the irony, and it might be again a bit premature to bring this up now, but I use the word strategy because I think we're seeing it again to a degree. We're now seeing Kathleen doing the exact same thing to the state's star witness. She's
Bobby.
now turned him into a Denny. Again, the key word for me is strategy. I'm just going to leave it there.
Well, basically what you want to do is to weaken the witness, right? You want to weaken the witness. You want to basically discredit the witness. Now, Kratz, Fallon, and Gunn, they were smart enough to realize that had they put Brendan Dassey on the stand, the whole case would have collapsed against Stephen, right? Because the defense team would have destroyed Brendan Dassey as a witness, right? So they couldn't risk the chance of putting Brendan on the stand. So Kratz was clever enough, echoing what you were saying, Kelly, to say, jeepers, he's a really bad witness for us, for the state. We're not going to use him at all. So they tried Stephen's case purely based on circumstantial evidence. But here's the problem. Are you trying to tell me that none of that jury had heard that press conference that Kratz gave? Of course they all did. They all heard the press conference. So in the back of their mind, they had a running narrative of what Brendan had said. So the jury pool was contaminated. It had to have been.
See, the only thing is, though, the only thing I struggle with is when they trialed Stephen Avery, it wasn't circumstantial evidence because, in my opinion, it was the alleged forensic evidence against him that got him hook, line, and sinker. That wasn't, in all my opinion, and this is my opinion, and you guys and the viewers, you completely can disagree. This is just open for my interpretation. I believe, if you removed all the witnesses from the stand, and I reckon you just purely trialed him with the blood in the carav and item FL and the experts that they have, but remove all the bullshit witnesses, your Bobby Dasseys, your Scott Tattages, your Blaines, you remove everyone, and you just took to trial the evidence that they allegedly had against Stephen, they still, in my opinion, would have won. The jury, I personally don't think they found Stephen guilty based on the eyewitnesses. Yes, it helped kind of help the narrative for the state flow a little bit more, but I think that they couldn't get past the blood in the rav. I believe they might, because they didn't understand the full, complex technicalities of item FL and contaminations and Sherry Colhane and all that. I think that's what secured the conviction and the guilty verdict at the end. Of course, there could be other influences like, there is alleged, theories that there was tampering within the jury itself. I'm not ruling that out, but I'm saying that you could take this to trial, remove the witnesses, and I believe that they still could have had a guilty verdict regardless. So it wasn't so much circumstantial. The circumstantial comes into it because the defense didn't bring enough experts of their own to undermine the state's witnesses of that forensic. But the forensic evidence against Stephen itself was pretty solid, because no one in the court of law, or in that trial at least, was able to raise enough reasonable doubt that someone planted the blood in the rav, because it kept going back to that. That was damage done without any witnesses needed.
Except I'll put this scenario to you. What you just said, Kelly, makes 100% sense, except for one witness. That's Bobby Dassey. All right. Now, if you remove Bobby Dassey, say Bobby Dassey never testified at all and Bobby Dassey didn't see anything, Stephen Avery could have simply said, oh, when Teresa Horbach came to my property to take a photograph of the van, she went back in her vehicle and she had trouble starting her car. And I said, oh, look, just step out of your car. I'll check. I'm a mechanic. I could check. So, I accidentally started to bleed again. And unbeknownst to me, I'd left a bit of blood in her vehicle. And at the same time, I went to check underneath the hood just to see if her battery was functional, etc., etc. So potentially he could have explained what his blood and what his DNA underneath the hood could have been as a result of, i.e., Stephen could have made up a bullshit story to account for why his DNA or blood was present inside her vehicle, right? But if you notice, Stephen never, ever comes up with any excuses, nothing. And that's because the state star witness, Bobby Dassey, said, he was asked, did you see your uncle together with Teresa Horbach at any stage? And he said, no. So that means that if Stephen had come up with this particular scenario, Bobby would have said, I never saw any of that. So he had no way to counteract it.
Here's the problem, though, and let's flip that, because if it's going to work for Stephen, it can work for Bobby as well. At the end of the day, if Stephen would have said that, that would have been a lie. If Stephen would have made that lie up, then that would not have looked good for Stephen, because you don't have to lie the truth, right? So that's a scenario that could have happened, but it didn't, because it would have been bullshit. So you can't really say that because it didn't happen. But then if I flip that, I could also say Bobby never, ever, 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 like Stephen, could have made this theory up. He also could never had to insert himself either. Bobby Dassey could have turned around and said, I don't know when she came. I was laying in bed. I was having a shower when she must have come. I never even saw her rock up. So if we want to make a theory for what Stephen could have done, Bobby could have done the same. He never had to ever insert himself into this, ever. Because at the end of the day, Bobby didn't even know whether Stephen had seen he was still there at that stage. He didn't even know whether Stephen had seen him looking out the window. So he never had to take that responsibility. And especially if he is guilty, to sit there and go and insert yourself. I know a lot of, people have done it over the years. But again, if we're talking about a planned framing here, this is where we're going with Kathleen's, you would then have to think that Bobby's thought about this. Why insert yourself? You don't have to. You could turn around and go, I didn't even say anything. I don't even know when she rocked up. I must have been in the shower, my 5-minute shower when she came, and by the time she came and gone and the time I got out, that must have been her window period. I have no idea. I don't even know when she came. So the problem is, again, Bobby Dassey, although a lot of us do think that there was a few things twisted with some of the things he says on the stand versus a few things he says in his statements, I still think they could have removed Bobby and you still would have found guilty, because at the end of the day, was the one and the only one person that the jury actually asked to see their testimony again, because something must not have said. Exactly. So if they weren't even taking Bobby into consideration, they thought something was iffy with him, then they didn't rule because of Bobby. So you could have had the trial without Bobby, because they didn't, from the sounds of it, they didn't fucking even believe Bobby. They knew something wasn't matching. They asked, out of all people, can we please hear the testimony of Bobby Dassey again? So you could remove Bobby Dassey from this, and I believe you'd still get the same verdict. It wasn't Bobby Dassey that made Stephen Avery guilty. It was the forensic science that was against Stephen Avery, that the defense did not get the right experts to dispute against the state experts.
And if
my theory.
Yeah, correct. And I agree with you, because if you're a planter, you're not relying on Bobby Dassey or Brendan Dassey, are you? You're not reliant on anyone. If you're planting, you're targeting Stephen Avery and only Stephen Avery. What transpires afterwards, they don't care. The most important piece of forensic evidence against Stephen is the blood in the RAV4. Everything else you can explain as being transported and brought onto the property. Trying to explain away the blood is a different kettle of fish.
Parole. And if he doesn't, he'll get life without parole.
So that's it. That's the full episode, episode 3. What do you guys make of it overall? I know you guys just kind of unloaded and said a lot, so maybe Big Jeff wants to. He seems to always go first on the wrap up.
I mean, I don't think that there's much more to say than what's already been said here, and that is there are no aspects of Brendan's confession that can actually be corroborated. It's clear that Wiegert and Fassbender, sort of walked him down some path. Nothing corroborates that path. And as a matter of fact, most of the stuff that there's a serious lack of forensic evidence that should be there that would corroborate that path if it were true, rendering his whole confession complete, total, and utter bullshit. As was evidenced, if we get all the way to MAM 2 by Judge Wood in the appeal, which says basically the same things that the gentleman said in his assessment. It's the police that are leading him to these things first before he's thinking of them himself. So I think everyone, it's clear to everyone what level of bullshit that this actually is. So that's my analysis of this episode. Thank you. On to the next.
We saw the introduction of Brendan Dassey and his story. And I think what's amazing is how anyone with a functioning brain can't see the fact that Brendan was completely coerced and he was completely clueless. He never presented one piece of information that wasn't already known and out there in public, right? He never presented anything. So if he said to the investigators, yep, we took her here and we shot her in the head, then all bets are off, right? No one knew that piece of information. Only the killer or killers did. If you go through his testimony, his interrogation, and I've read it several times, you'll realize that there's nothing that Brendan says that is unique and only that the killer would know. All the major points were either on television or fed to them or fed to him by Fassbender and Wiegert, and my mind is blown that anyone can believe otherwise. Thank you.
Brendan Dassey is such a tragedy. It's hard not to bring emotions into it. Like when I used to do interviews with Investigator T, the one of the main advices he always said to me was, you can't get emotionally invested if you're looking into a case. We are human. It is our instinct. You as a woman, watching this, you will have that motherly instinct. You will have that instant connection to feel, but you need to not. To look at a case, as it is, and to eliminate yourself from being biased, eliminate yourself from having to really go down any, to be able to explore all options, you can't bring emotion into it. But that to me is really hard when it comes to Brendan. I struggle. I become that mother. I become that person where it hurts to watch this young man get it taken advantage of by two people that, in my opinion, at this stage knew where they were going with this, and they kept going. But in fairness, if you were to follow Investigator T, I think regardless with or without emotion, I think we'd all come up with the same conclusion. He was coerced. This was straight up a false confession. You don't need emotions to make you feel that. You can just see that. And I believe that it has been shown when it's gone through the level of courts and it has been ruled as a coerced confession, people have seen it for what it is. And I believe these people, didn't use as much emotion. Their job is to see it for the legality of it and the legal aspect of it, and they still saw through the bullshit. It's one of those things that you just think, how could have this been stopped? What would it have taken? Would it have never gone there if he did have someone with him in that room that day? Would that have changed what happened?
Well, put it this way, Kelly. If Laura Nyrider or Kathleen Zellner had been sitting next to Brendan Dassey, would have he been home now?
Of course he would have.
Yeah.
Anybody but Len Kaczynski.
Yep. Anybody but Len Kaczynski and Michael O'Kelly.
People do go hard on the Barb situation. And the reason why I think that is a level of unfairness is because people are expecting that Barb is meant to know the law better than anyone as well. Even if Barb was there, yes, it might have changed like some of the questioning. They might not have been so direct because they had that influence of the mother there. But in my opinion, at this stage with Brendan, they knew they needed him. They knew it. I wouldn't have been surprised even if Barb was there, by the end of it, they both wouldn't have been a part of this scenario because they knew the direction they needed. They could not have let Brendan walk out that day without something. Like Big Jeff keeps echoing, the bail the bail thing was kept coming up. This was really critical timing, the property bond. So they could not let him walk out without something. So that's why I think it's not fair when people say Barb should have been there or Barb if it would have changed the situation. Yeah, it might have. But then again, it might not have either. They might have just convinced Barb even more in the room like Brendan that Stephen was guilty. You just can't say that. It's just we don't know what would happen. All I know is that they went in there with a directive, and that was Brendan. They had him on their radar and they did it.
Yeah, on the subject of Barb, I mean, but Barb swears up and down that that she did not give permission. But let's just assume for a second that she did, and I'm not saying she did. Let's just assume for a second that she did. I do not believe that she had a single inkling as to the ill intent that Kelly was just talking about. Number one, and number two, that she could think anything beyond that her emotionally disabled, intellectually disabled, quiet son who likes to play video games with his friends could have possibly had anything to do with it. So there was nothing really that bad that could come of it if I said yes. I have to believe that's, if she said yes, which she says she did, but suppose she did. I can't believe she did it with any malintent or even any possible thought that this would give her a zillion guesses of what could have come out of that interview. That this would have been one of her guesses. It's just not on anybody's radar screen that anything like this could have happened out of that interview.
I just want to say I agree with Big Jeff and Kelly. In an actual fact, I don't believe even if Barb was present, it wouldn't have made an iota of difference. I think in the end, the investigators would have tried to convince Barb as well of the evil deeds done by Stephen. They would have turned it around that Stephen was the one that had influenced her son, etc., take a plea deal, blah, blah, blah. I believe the only difference would have been if there was an attorney present sitting right next to Brendan, because only an attorney can understand the type of questions that are being done by Fassbender and Wiegert, and the attorney would have said to Brendan, do not answer that. You don't have to answer that. In actual fact, we're walking out of this room. because Brendan was not under arrest. Brendan got arrested right at the end when he confessed to the rape and murder of Teresa Hobart. So Fassbender and Wiegert had nothing on their radar to arrest him until he confessed. An attorney would have followed the conversation and said, Brendan, there is no need to answer that. Do not answer that. You look at any civil suit deposition. You have the attorney sitting right next to the person being questioned, and the attorney says, don't answer that. No need to answer that. So, an attorney who's worth their money would have said, Brendan, we are leaving. This interview is over. Done. Barb could not have done that. My opinion.
Yeah.
Poor people lose all the time.
Yep. And the thing is, as a mum, you know, if they were saying things like, because you hear them saying to Brendan, just tell the truth, Brendan, just tell the truth. If they were saying that while Barb was present and she, you know, wasn't quite understanding their intentions to that, you would have probably found that she would have been encouraging it too. Like, come on, Brendan, just tell the truth, not realizing where they were leading with it. You were just kind of like, you know, as a mum, like when you're sitting there, I know this sounds funny, but I've been in the office a few times because one of my children have been a bit naughty in class, and I'm having the interview with the teacher, or at this stage it was the principal, and they're like, so, you know, and I'm saying to them, own up in front of the principal, come on, own up, take it on the chin, say sorry, tell them what you did. And they're looking at me like, Mum, seriously? Because I was trying to be helpful, and, you know, I want my child to own up to their responsibilities. And I have to consider that if Barb was sitting in that room and she heard them say, just tell the truth, that she would have, you know, not understood where they were going with it. And you would have seen her maybe echo it, going, come on, Brennan, just tell them what they're doing. Not because she wanted him to lie. It's because in her head, she was trying to teach her son to get it out without realizing the motive behind why Fassbender and Wiegert was going there in the first place. I can see that as a possibility as well. But again, great episode, everyone. Next week, we go even deeper.
That's right. We will go a little deeper. Well, this episode went a little longer than the others, and I appreciate you guys sticking around. Who's out there? Thank you guys for coming and joining and talking about the second half of this episode. This has been Discussing a Murderer.